It is Friday, September 22nd, 2017. My name is Dennis Schlaghek, and we are here at the Noble Seymour Crippen House Museum of the Norwood Park Historical Society in Chicago. And we're here to conduct an interview with Tom Spenny about his experiences in the Army National Guard. And we're also joined by Art Crumry, who is doing our video and audio work today. So we'll begin with a little bit of biographical background for Tom. Tom, if you could give us first your full name and date of birth.
Yes, Thomas P. Spenny. That's like a penny with an S in front, is the way we always say it. And I was born on August 25th, 1940.
And you were born in Norwood Park?
No, I was born on the south side of Chicago. I forget the hospital, but I was always a Chicagoan. My father says that I was the only kid in the family that was really a Chicagoan because the others were born in Oak Park. But we moved to the north side in about 1940, 41. And then I came to Norwood Park in 1948, and here I am.
Okay. And now we mentioned that you were in the Army National Guard. What years did you serve?
Okay, actually, Dennis, it was Army Reserves.
Okay.
The National Guard, we always teased that they were NG, was their prefix on their service numbers, and that stood for no good. But anyway, Reserves, I served from about December of 1963 to December of 1969.
Okay. And let's get back to some of your childhood details. So you moved here to Norwood Park. Your family moved here in 48, you said.
Yes, they moved to Norwood Park. My mother fell in love with the community because it really reminded her of her hometown of Ottawa, Kansas, which was a, kind of a old town. It was the county seat of Franklin County in Kansas, and the houses here were very reminded her of those of Ottawa, Kansas. Mm-hmm. So yes, that's when we came to Norwood Park.
And what did your father do for a living?
He worked, at that time, he worked for Zenith Radio, which is pretty much gone now. Started out as a lowly clerk, I believe they called him back in the day, and rose to be the credit manager, and I think he became president of the sales corporation of Zenith too. So he did well for himself. He worked for them from, I think it was 1939 to he retired in 1976.
So did he work at the Dickens and Austin building?
He did all those years. In fact, after being born on the south side of Chicago, we moved up within walking distance of Austin and Dickens, so that for the first 8 years of my life, he could walk to work. And then we moved to Norwood Park, and then he had to become either driving or public transportation commuter to work every day.
And how many siblings did you have?
3 siblings. I have a I was the oldest, a sister, Jane, a brother, Richard, and a sister, Linda. So Linda was the last one born in 1949, so she was the only one born while we lived in Norwood Park.
Okay. And where'd you go to school?
I started out when we lived in the Austin Dickens neighborhood at a grade school called Lovett. And I don't know if I really loved it, but that was the name. I think Joseph Lovett. And when we moved, I got into it and moved to Norwood Park School here in the community. And later on, in the 50s, went to Taft High School, just a block from where we are here. And went to Wright College for a little bit before going off to university. Oh, excuse me.
It's okay. And so you went to Taft High School, and then you said you went to college as well at Wright. What field were you studying?
Well, when I went to Wright College, I took a couple of accounting courses. But when I went off to university, I sort of was on an engineering track, but somehow that got changed into a teaching track, and I graduated with credentials to be a high school teacher.
Okay. And then it was after that that you became involved with the Army Reserve, correct? After college?
Yes. I taught for a year at, actually I taught at a branch. They had a branch of Taft High School, and I taught the freshman class. I taught algebra and other kinds of math there at the freshman branch. And about at the end of that year, I started seeing some notices that they wanted to maybe draft me into the Army. So I happened to be playing some softball with some guys that were from the church. We had a little team and did a little softball. Turned out one of the men on the team, a local guy, lived in Norwood Park too, was a civilian, I guess you'd call him a civilian recruiter at a local Army Reserve unit that was located at Kedzie and Bryn Mawr in Chicago on the north side. So his name was Phil Schessling, and he sort of got to talking to me. We got talking about military and his reserve unit, and I guess between the innings that we were playing softball. But he told me, why don't you come over and we'd like you to join us. So I thought about that, and I guess there was some thought, some people speculated that because I was teaching high school and because I had a background in math, that maybe that was more like a critical occupation, so maybe they would ignore me on the drafting anyway. But I guess I thought, I had two thoughts as I can remember at the time. One was that I was still sort of new at teaching, and I liked it. I liked it well enough, but I wasn't totally established into it. And I thought it might be an interesting experience to be in the military. That was one side of the coin. And but then the other thought about maybe being in the reserves sounded like that could be kind of a cross between two things, that I could go back to my teaching after the basic training and the OJT training was done, and then I could be a teacher and be in the military at the same time. So with that all being said, I joined up. I joined their unit. I believe I was sworn in sometime in December of 1963. And should I go ahead, or what do you want to?
Yeah, we're just trying to get some of the reasons and background for that. You said that there were sort of hints that you might be going into the draft. Did you have a low number, or what else was indicating that you might be called up in the draft?
Well, I think I received a notice in the mail that my number was coming up, kind of thing. So the alternatives were to join this reserves, and it was just, I probably wouldn't have thought about that except for the fellow that he was a civilian recruiter for the military at this particular reserve unit, and in talking to him, he said, "Hey, Tom, come on over, join up."
So when did you go through the actual process of showing up for the Army and being processed? What was that day like?
Well, um, I I might have put I might have put the wrong date for my actual enlistment. It might have been in the fall because I remember. Yeah, because I remember now. It's coming back to me. I was waiting for the first step after signing up for the unit. So maybe that was more like in September, something like that. Because I was waiting for the first step would be the basic training, the 8 weeks, and we were supposed to go to Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri. So I remember that fall that I was doing some substitute teaching, and that was the fall that President Kennedy was assassinated. So that was one of the things that I remember well, and I was waiting. So around December, it was that finally they said this was the time that you were going off to Fort Leonard Wood. And I saw in that on my yearbook that we graduated in February of 1964. So take that back 8 weeks, and that was probably about the middle of December that I went off to Fort Leonard Wood. I just remember that as being a bus trip from Chicago to Leonard Wood, going through St. Louis, and getting to the fort. And before very long, you had your shots, you had your fatigues, you had your dress uniform, you had your military glasses, you had your military haircut, and you were all set to go.
And then just to backtrack a little bit, were you still single at this time when you joined up?
Yes, I was still single and living at home in Norwood Park. And like I say, I had taught, my first year I taught at the branch of Taft, and it was really only 2 blocks from home, so I walked to school just like the kids did. And I was still single. So, yeah.
So there you get down to your induction, and then you get all your Army outfitting. When did the actual basic training begin, and what was that like?
Well, it began the moment I stepped off the bus, I think, and the getting the outfits and all that. And then we lived in barracks, and it was just a kind of a daily training routine. We trained, we were up at the crack of dawn basically, and usually we had to do some PT and DD, dismounted drill, and physical training before even we got a chance to even have a bite to eat for breakfast. So
what did that training consist of, the physical training and the DD?
Well, the physical training was like just calisthenics, and I remember things like running obstacle courses, running a mile, doing chin-ups and push-ups, and those kind of things. And then learning marching. Marching was like learning to step in cadence and make our moves, the marching forth, and I forget all the names of the move, but and then down the road, and years later, I rose to the rank of sergeant, and I had the duty at times to lead those kind of things. So I found out that almost leading a platoon to march in cadence was almost as hard as doing it yourself. In fact, probably harder than doing it yourself, because it was follow the leader. But when you are the leader, then it was kind of a different ball game. But me being a teacher, I think that came sort of naturally.
At that time, did you have any weapons training?
Well, yes, along the way. Then after that being said, then the rest of the day was filled up with training of all kinds of sorts. We had we had first aid training where we learned to deal with war wounds and situations like that, how to do first responder type of thing, field first aid where we would try to patch somebody up and give them some immediate patching. And we wouldn't have the training to be doctors, of course, but we were supposed to be able to stabilize somebody that was injured and so that they could live to get better care. We did chemical warfare where we learned how to use gas masks and protect ourselves in case of a gas attack. And I remember that they had a very graphic demonstration where we went into a building that they was gassed, and we had our mask on and we were breathing normally and that. But then at the end, they told us, okay, now it was really easy, wasn't it? You know, but just to prove their point, they said, now take off your gas mask. So we did, and oh my God, the gas would hit you and you'd be running out and with tears in your eyes. And so they'd show you how that mask really did protect you totally. That was the idea. We did things like, then we had rifle training. We had, I think we used M16s at that time, or was it M14s? I think we learned them both. We learned to do low crawl and to deal with barbed wire and things like that by crawling. They would fire, I guess they call them tracers. I mean, I don't think they were firing real bullets over us, but we had to crawl along underneath the tracers as if we were under attack, you know, so we had to do things like that. We went on what they call bivouac, which was a Boy Scout camp out was what it was, and being a old Boy Scout, it was no more than going on a camping trip. It's a little bit more austere maybe than some of our camping trips, but same idea that you had to kind of live bare bones and cook your meals and things like that, and have a canteen and a cook kit, and so it was like an extension of Boy Scout Training 101. Mm-hmm.
So how did you feel about this? Was this something you were unaccustomed to before you did this? Did you feel that you were getting the hang of it right away, or did you feel like a fish out of water, or how did that go for you?
Well, that's a good question, and I think I can answer it two ways. I can answer it for the some guys couldn't handle it very well. I think that was pretty foreign to them, and they had a rough time, I think, with basic training. But to me, as I mentioned, it was just like Boy Scouts. You know, it was just like fun. I actually found some enjoyment out of the camp out. I mean, that was like a nice camping trip, and camaraderie of some of the guys, and some of the things. I mean, they were really hard-nosed on you because they wanted you to be military. They wanted you to, and they did always emphasize that, you know, you're not here to, you're not officers, you're recruits. So you've got to learn that when you officers say something to you, don't ask you, tell you to do something, you do it. So if you can learn that, you're going to be fine. And just don't try to reason with them. Don't try to argue with them. If they say it, you do it, and you're fine. You won't get into any trouble, you know. So that wasn't too hard to get used to. You just had to say, well, okay, that's the way it is. And but getting used to the only thing was that they really did work you. You were up really early in the morning. They didn't give you a break during the day. It was hard staying awake because you went to bed. You know, I think they put you to bed at a time that you could get some sleep, but not much sleep. So we learned a good technique. You could sleep while standing up. You could actually almost sleep while marching. not quite. But if you walked over to the side of the road, they gave you a 5-minute break. You could stand on your feet, and you could actually just get some shut eye. So which I guess that was allowed. But yeah, I didn't find it to be too difficult to get used to, and I did find some enjoyment. And I liked the out of doors, so things that we did out in the woods, and that was, that was fine.
Mm-hmm. Are there any individuals who stand out, any officers or other soldiers that you remember from that time?
Not a lot. We had various drill sergeants, they were called. One we kind of liked, his name was Sergeant Smith, so that was easy to remember. And I don't know. I can't remember too many. I was kind of buddies with a couple of the guys, but it was kind of a fleeting thing because we were just together for 8 weeks, so I don't think there was any further down the road contact with the guys. They were just ones that we got along, and there were a couple I didn't get along with very well. I remember one was he was, I don't know, we guys, they would give us like a group of us, maybe it was called a platoon, I think, the smaller group. So maybe there were 10, 15 guys in a platoon. And one guy in particular, I remember, he did everything he could think about to get out of doing, like scrubbing floors or making beds or something like that. He'd hide out or whatever he'd do. And seemed to me like the drill sergeant didn't notice. He was able to fly under the radar. But I remember getting kind of, and some of the others did kind of angry with him, pissed off, that here's this guy that's doing nothing, and you're working your butt off to cleaning floors, which, it's okay. I mean, it's work, and you're supposed to do it, so you do it. But so, like, where's the fairness here? Mm-hmm. So I remember getting into at least a verbal scuffle with him. Mm-hmm. So that's what you were saying before about having some kind of a memory of something that struck on my mind, but in the long run it didn't mean anything. But
so after the 8 weeks of training, then what happened? You were assigned somewhere else?
Well, so after 8 weeks of intensive basic training, then the idea was that you were supposed to go for four months, because the whole tour of active duty was for 6 months. So you were supposed to go somewhere for active training, and my MOS was first aid, the first aid end of it.
I'm sorry, what does MOS
medical
stand for?
Medical occupational service, I guess.
Okay.
So I thought that I was going to go to, what was it called, in Houston. It was a medical training fort.
Houston?
I have to think about that. But for some reason, and I was kind of looking forward, actually, to going somewhere different. I hadn't done a lot of traveling in my life, so I was thinking if I get 4 months at some location, that maybe that would be fun, to get some training there. So for some reason, they didn't send me to Fort whatever it was in Houston, and I was a little bit sad about that. I think I even questioned it. Well, I wanted to go to Fort Houston, or Fort Sam. Hmm. Was that what it's called? Or Sam Houston, I guess. Anyway, Fort Bragg? Oh, now I'm getting my forts confused, but maybe it'll come to me. Anyway, where they sent me, believe it or not, was Fort Sheridan, up on the North Shore in Chicago, which at that time was still an active fort. And it was sort of like, It was sort of like a officers' country club up there. They had the officers lived in nice brick barracks, not barracks, nice brick homes, kind of like little mansions. They had a golf course, and they had a motor pool where you could actually people could work on their cars. They had a dispensary there. They had, I mean, just a lot of area, and I don't think they were doing any training there as such, but it was a military post, and I got attached to the dispensary there, which is like a, what would you call it now? A medical center.
Pharmacy or such?
Well, what do they call it? But the hospitals have these auxiliary outpatient, like an outpatient medical facility. So that's what it was. It wasn't it wasn't a serious hospital of any sort, but you could get shots there, and you could have basic first aid of anything, you know. And so anyway, so I learned things there like taking blood pressure and heartbeat and different things like that, and could do some of them. I don't think I got into giving shots, but maybe something, shoot them in the butt kind of thing. But so that's what. So then it was more like a 9-to-5 job. I'd get up in the morning. We'd have barracks, and get up and walk to the dispensary and be there and be involved in the procedures of some of the military personnel, both the officers and their children, their families, and some of the other people that were involved in the fort. We had a motor pool there, and I remember one of our duties that sometimes happened. We sometimes got a weekend duty of being part of a military funeral, and for that we would get we had M16 rifles, and we'd go to the place where they were giving the military funeral, and at such and such a time we'd give our 21 gun salute, and so it was ready, aim, boom, ready, aim, boom. And I think we had to load each individual blank. These were blanks, obviously, we were firing off. And if you didn't get them loaded up quick enough, you had to pretend like you were ready, aim, boom. And enough of them would go off that you couldn't tell that you were the one that didn't fire. But anyway, that was. So I probably did half a dozen of those military funerals over the time I was there. And then we could get a weekend pass, and with a weekend pass, I could go home easily enough, and I would end up having a car on base so that I could drive back and forth to home, which was not too far, because this was in, what do they call it, Lake Bluff, I think.
Yeah, I believe so. So that was 6 months at Fort Sheridan?
4 months at Fort
4
Sheridan,
months.
so that made a total with the Fort Leonard Wood plus the 6 months at Fort Sheridan, made a total of 6 months, which was 6 months of active duty. And that was part of the reserve obligation was for 6 months of active duty, 2 weeks of summer camp every summer, 4 training sessions per month, and a 6-year total commitment from the day of signing to the end. So that was the end of my active duty.
So then at that point, you went back home, and you would be scheduled for the training sessions and
Right.
the 2 weeks, as you mentioned. So this would be maybe sometime late in 1964 when you finish at Fort Sheridan.
February, March, April, May, June. Yeah,
Mid-64.
Well, yeah, actually it was probably in June. Yeah, it was in June that I finished my active duty. And in June, I got a teaching job to finish off as a substitute. I got to finish off somebody had died in a high school, and some different friends knew that I was out of the military now, and so I went back to teaching for probably the rest of the June at Marshall High School, which is where I ended up for the rest of that 1964 year. And I also then started my tour of duty as an inactive reservist. And there we were at Kedzie and Bryn Mawr. It was just a series of kind of low-flying one-story buildings that we had there. And we went and we did training. We did sessions of training. We had three groups there. I think the third group, I'm not sure what they did, but we had a medical training team and a chemical training team. And what we mainly did during the year was we prepared ourselves to be good instructors at our 2-week summer sessions at various forts. So that was kind of the deal for us, that we and again, going back to the Boy Scout analogy, it was sort of like going to Boy Scout meetings. We would go one night a week, and occasionally, but not very often, we do a weekend drill. So instead of doing, so we were required to do 4 sessions per month. And it was like 4 Wednesday nights, I believe might have been a Wednesday, 4 Wednesday nights a month. We went to do our session. And they counted as one session. Or one month they might say, well, we're going to do a weekend, which would be more intense. We'd have maybe all together kind of training. Maybe we'd do some marching and other kinds of military things. And there we'd go on Saturday morning early, and it would be like a whole 8-hour day. And then we'd go home, come back on Sunday morning, and do another whole 8-hour day, and that would count for 4 sessions. So occasionally it would be that. And sometime, I'm thinking it was maybe about 4 years into my overall duty, the unit, the medical training team and the chemical training team, they decided to move them. And we got moved to the far south side on 71st and Jeffrey, which is not far from the South Shore Country Club. And now we were in a storefront building that used to be some kind of an auto dealership on 71st Street. And there, we didn't do the weekly things. We would go every month. We would do the weekend drill, and that was a bit more intensive because I can remember being kind of late and driving like a bat out of hell going down the Kennedy Expressway to downtown and going out the Dan Ryan or maybe the Lakeshore Drive, one or the other, to get down to 71st and Jeffrey, because that was quite a haul. You know, that was a bit of a drive. And so, and I'd always be late and always driving fast, and never got caught though. But so that was a little bit more. But that's where I then ended up my career in that building there on the south side.
So you said your unit would then go out to other Army bases to instruct
We did.
medics?
So then we would do this training during the year, and when it would come to be a summertime, there would be 2 weeks that would be scheduled to go to some U.S. fort to do the first aid training. Now, I remember we went to Camp McCoy, Wisconsin. I remember that. I think that was a couple of summers. We went back to Fort Leonard Wood. I remember at least once more. That was one summer I remember. I think we went to Fort Bragg. Was it either South or North Carolina? One summer. And, well, anyway, it was probably be 5 summers, I guess, that I went away. I think I might not have had to go that, when I came home from active duty, I don't think I had to go that summer because I just barely got home. So I think I might not have had to do that summer. And I think I remember having a choice to go to my last. I was about to get out, so I'm thinking that I got out in September of 1969, something like that. And so I believe they said that I didn't have to go. I could if I wanted, but I didn't have to go. But I kind of liked it. So I did go for that last one. So, and it was by the time I was toward the end of my military, I had the rank of staff sergeant, which is like you get your 3 stripes as the sergeant patch, and then you get a rocker underneath that. That's a staff sergeant. And so that was a pretty good rank for being what I did, being a drill instructor. So it seemed like I got some respect. And again, going back to the teaching thing, that's what we really were. We were really first aid teachers, but we did it military style, not like high school style. And we had some leverage to hold over our recruits because we really wanted them to pay attention and get trained. Mm-hmm. So that was it was actually the summer camp drills were actually, I consider them kind of fun. I mean, I did enjoy them. And it was part the teacher in me, but part the camaraderie, part the fact that we got a weekend pass usually between the 2 weeks and we could visit the local hangout. I think when we went to Fort Leonard Wood, we actually booked, our little platoon booked to stay at one of the resorts at Lake of the Ozarks. And so we had kind of a good time at one of the local motels there. Mm-hmm. And dealing with the recruits, we tried to make the training, I mean, I won't say fun because that would be, it wasn't meant to be, it wasn't supposed to be fun. We were supposed to teach them, it was serious, but sometimes we could teach them by comedy a little bit. So we had, I remember one of the little comedy things was a little slide presentation we were showing them, and somewhere in the slide presentation we had a woman, with her legs, just a silhouette of a woman, a sexy looking woman, and we'd put that on the screen and dance it around a little bit, and so we'd say, oh, that was just to get your attention and make sure you're awake, something like that. And then, so then inevitably, for example, one of the recruits would come up after the training session, and because we'd allow questions and things like that, and come up and say, Sarge, I got a little sliver in my finger. What do you say I could do about it? Or something like that. Say, well, recruit, they say, or private, I guess. Well, private, we don't really teach that kind of a thing, but if you would like to go off and blow your finger off, we can tell you how to treat that. Something like that.
So these recruits that you were training, they were going into the regular army?
They most likely were heading off to Vietnam. Mm-hmm. It was they were regular army recruits. Mm-hmm. So
as these years are going by, when you started in 64, and then right at that point, soon afterwards, U.S. involvement in Vietnam begins to ramp up and ramp up. Did you recognize any change in attitudes among your comrades or among the recruits? How did you see a change over that period of time from 64 to 69?
Well, that's a good question, too. As far as our unit, let's say the unit that I worked out of or trained out of, the only thing is that as the time went on, we became a little bit more nervous, let's call it, as to our status. Because, I mean, we as reservists could be called up for service, to be called back up onto active duty. But we thought maybe our MOS, being trainers of a larger body of recruits, might be important enough that we might not be called up to be on active duty ourselves. I guess we were technically on active duty for those 2 weeks in the summer, but that was temporary. So that was a bit of a concern on our part, I think. So we did see some, and as time went on, I mean, some of our platoon buddies kind of went on with their lives, got married, had children, bought a house, got more invested in their occupations and things like that. So so there was some additional nervousness about being called up. As far as our duties in the summer, I don't think I would say I saw too much difference. I mean, recruits that we had were not necessarily ever, I mean, from day one, were not necessarily there because they wanted to be. And some of them handled military better than some of the others that did not handle it too well. And some took it with, I think, some fear. But I think the vast majority of them just went along with the program, and if they were told to do something, they would do it. And I think they found out that it was easier for them to do it than to not do it and suffer the consequences. So, in that case, I don't think I saw too much difference. The recruits that we trained, the privates that we trained, could have many, many MOSs. They could be a cook, they could be a driver, they could be artillery, they could be a rifleman, they could have been anything. But it didn't matter because first aid and chemical warfare, which the things we taught, were taught to everyone, blanket. I mean, everyone got it. We weren't, it was, first aid was just so important that everyone had to do it. And should, and deserve to also, no matter what MOS. I mean, whether they were going to be driving a truck or cooking a meal, they still needed to know first aid. So in that case, I would have to say that I didn't notice any radical difference in the trainees, the privates that came for first aid. It was the same thing. Pretty much.
So in 1969, then, you finished your stint with the Army. So you went back into teaching at that point? Or you were already established in
right.
teaching?
Well,
really,
in
most of the time?
1964, when I got back from my 6 month of active duty, I started teaching at Marshall High School, and as I mentioned, it probably was no more than about a month, but it was pretty intensive because I inherited a program that had been ongoing, and without knowing the kids that well, well, not at all, I had to kind of get to know them immediately. I had to pick up where the previous teacher left off. I had to give them their final exams. I had to give them final grades. And so it was, and in those days we had what they called in Chicago a division alternately called a homeroom, where we had kids that we took care of personally as our own, you know, and we didn't teach them, but we had to take care of their needs. We took care of, oh, that's right, I had to also get them programmed for the next year, for the next school year. So that means I had to get to know where they stood in their class, if they were, how many credits they'd had, what credits they needed, and had to get them programmed into things they needed for the next school year. So it was pretty intense. It was one of the most intense teaching things I ever had because of it being thrown into that with so little time to get all this done. The end of the year is always a scramble for a teacher, but this was a particularly scramble for me. Then over the summer, I guess I debated what I wanted to do, and I had liked my experience there. I had met some nice people in the faculty. I liked the administration there at Marshall High School. It was to me, it was an interesting and a fairly interesting and good high school. Big, one of the biggest in the city, as I recall. So anyway, I asked for a position. I think I got what do you call that? Assigned. I got an assignment. So I had so much choices, but I asked if I could get an assignment at Marshall High School, and I did. So from that time in fall of 1964 until the end of my military service, that's where I was. I was a teacher at Marshall High School. Mm-hmm. And so...
Do you think the military training had some kind of positive effect on your teaching abilities? Or that it seems like they would kind of work together, you know, that you being an instructor in the Army Reserve and then being a classroom teacher at the same time.
I think that the two went well together. I think I do. And then another thing that came about when I got home from the military was I became a Boy Scout leader. So now this all tied in together. I'm a Boy Scout leader. I'm going on camping trips. I'm going to Boy Scout meetings weekly. I'm going to the reserve unit meetings, which I have referred to as another Boy Scout meeting. And I'm teaching. I'm getting involved in some of the activities from Marshall High School, some of the extracurricular stuff. I think I was a bowling coach for a while. No, did I? No, I didn't. I did that at my first school. I was a bowling coach. I got involved in some math club activities and things like that, like professional things with the kids. And then those weekend drills, and I had a lot on my plate.
Mm-hmm. So overall, when you think back on your Army Reserve experience, what kind of impact do you think it had on your life?
Well, I think it fulfilled one of the goals that I had for the military, or felt that it was necessary for me. I felt it was an experience that I wanted to have. I'd heard a lot about it. I knew people were in it. Some were bitter about it and said that they couldn't stand it. It was like the worst thing that ever happened to them, and others took it with a grain of salt. And I don't know that I knew anybody that considered military experience. Well, some did kind of like it. I don't think anybody could say that were involved in actual combat would say that was any. I mean, that can't in any way, shape, or form be pleasant. Discounting that, there are people that were in the military in foreign countries generally had a positive experience of being in that country and living there for a while in the military, and maybe even having a girlfriend in that country or whatever, but that I'd heard. But yes, I think it fulfilled that goal, and that my experience was positive, and I came out of it and being able to talk to you, Dennis, and leave this memory of that as being a positive memory, that it did fulfill my goal of being in the military. And it wasn't all that bad. It was, I'll tell you one thing, I don't think I ever was more physically fit in my life than when I came out of the military, or maybe I could say when I came out of basic training. I could run a mile in 5 minutes or something like that, or a little over 5 minutes. And I could do chin-ups, I could do push-ups, which probably if you asked me today to do them, I say, well, maybe, I don't think so. But I felt very physically fit at that point, and was at a good weight. And
Well, great. Well, thank you very much for sharing your experiences with the Army Reserve. It's been very interesting. I know I learned a lot. I don't even quite understand what the Army Reserve was, as far as how it differs from the regular Army, how it differs from the National Guard. But it seems like in your case, it was a positive experience.
Yeah.
So thank you for sharing that with us.
Well, you're welcome. And I thought it was, I also felt it was a good cross between having to go away for, even if I hadn't gone into combat, to go away for 2 or 3 years and do something. But I suppose that would have been okay too, but I don't think anybody wanted to go to Vietnam. It was not a country to be in. So, well, thank you for letting me share my experiences with you.
Thank you very much.